The town of Ashford had always been a quiet place. The kind of town where nothing ever happened and everyone knew each other by name. It was a town where the biggest excitement was the annual pumpkin carving contest and the occasional high school football game. But there was one story, one legend that was whispered among the locals, something that even the bravest dared not speak aloud. It was the kind of tale that crept into your mind late at night when the wind howled through the trees, making them sway like skeletal fingers. They called it the Forest of Whispers. The legend went back generations, telling of a night, Halloween night, when the forest at the edge of town came alive with the voices of the lost. They were the voices of those who had wandered into the woods, thinking they could conquer it, only to find themselves hopelessly lost, trapped forever in a place that wasn't meant for the living. Some said the whispers were cries for help. Others claimed they were warnings, telling you to turn back before it was too late. But those who claimed to hear the whispers never returned to tell their tales. The forest had a way of keeping secrets. That Halloween, a group of us decided to put the legend to the test. We weren't children anymore, yet the thrill of proving our bravery was irresistible. The forest had always been off limits after dark, just another rule to break in our minds. We gathered at dusk, 5 of us, armed with flashlights, a sense of invincibility, and enough bravado to convince ourselves that the legend was nothing but a scare tactic invented by parents to keep their kids in line. It wasn't. The path leading into the forest was narrow, overgrown with thorny bushes that tugged at our clothes as we pushed through. The air was still, unnervingly quiet, as if the forest was holding its breath, waiting for us to make our move. The deeper we went, the more the world outside faded away, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. The trees grew closer together, their twisted branches clawing at the sky, blocking out the last remnants of light. It felt as if the forest itself was watching us, guiding us deeper into its grasp. We hadn't been walking long when the whispers started. At first they were faint, just a rustling in the leaves that could have been the wind, if there had been any wind. But soon the whispers became more distinct, more human. They came from all directions, disembodied voices floating through the air, overlapping in a cacophony of desperation. "Help me," one voice whispered, a faint trembling plea that seemed to come from just over my shoulder. I whipped around, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. I could feel my heart begin to race, a cold sweat prickling the back of my neck. "Did you hear that?" someone in the group asked, their voice shaking, but no one responded. We were all too busy scanning the trees, our bravado quickly dissolving into unease. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the spirits were drawing closer, closing in on us. Panic set in as we realized we had no idea where we were, the forest disorienting us with its endless maze of trees that all looked the same. Then one of us screamed. It was a sharp, guttural sound that pierced through the whispers, cutting them off abruptly. We turned to see one of the group, the bravest of us all, staring at something in the distance, his flashlight shaking in his hand. I followed his gaze and saw it, a figure, half shrouded in the shadows, standing motionless among the trees. It was human, or at least it had been. Its clothes were tattered, hanging off its emaciated frame, its skin pale as death. But it was the eyes that paralyzed me, hollow and black, staring straight at us with a hunger that chilled my blood. Before anyone could react, the figure lurched forward, moving with a jerky, unnatural speed. We bolted, running blindly through the forest, the whispers rising into a frantic chorus of screams and wails. The trees seemed to close in on us, their branches grabbing at us, tripping us up, tearing at our flesh. I could feel something cold and wet seeping through the air, a clammy mist that clung to my skin like the breath of the dead. We ran for what felt like hours, our legs burning, lungs on fire. But no matter how fast we ran, the whispers followed. I could hear them in my head, growing louder, more insistent, as if they were inside me, clawing at my mind. I tried to push them away, tried to focus on finding a way out, but the forest had swallowed us whole. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the forest went silent. The whispers ceased, the oppressive darkness lifted, and the mist dissipated. We found ourselves in a small clearing, gasping for breath, adrenaline still coursing through our veins. But the relief was short-lived. We were not alone. In the center of the clearing stood an old, crumbling well, its stones covered in moss and ivy. And surrounding it, half buried in the earth, were the bones. Piles of bones, bleached white by time, scattered haphazardly around the well. Skulls grinned up at us, empty eye sockets staring into nothingness. The smell of decay hung heavy in the air, turning my stomach. And then I heard it. A whisper louder than before, coming from deep within the well. "Join us," it said, the voice dripping with malice. The words echoed in my mind, a command I couldn't ignore. I stepped forward, my body moving on its own, drawn toward the well. The others called out to me, but their voices were distant, fading into the background. All I could hear was the whisper. I reached the edge of the well and looked down. The darkness inside was impenetrable, an abyss that seemed to go on forever. But as I peered into the void, something looked back at me. A pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, filled with an ancient, malevolent hunger. And then the ground beneath me gave way. The last thing I saw before I fell was the skeletal hand that reached up from the darkness, its bony fingers wrapping around my ankle, pulling me down into the abyss. The whispers erupted into a cacophony of screams as the darkness consumed me. The forest had claimed another soul. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer in the forest. The world around me was shrouded in an unnatural fog, thick and oppressive, swallowing everything in a soupy gray haze. I couldn't see more than a few feet in any direction, but I could feel it. Something watching me, something lurking just out of sight. My body ached, every muscle screaming in protest as I pushed myself to my feet. The air was cold, biting into my skin, and the silence was absolute, broken only by the faint sound of my own ragged breathing. I turned slowly, trying to get my bearings, but there was nothing familiar, nothing to anchor myself to reality. The forest was gone, replaced by this strange, barren landscape that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. "Where am I?" I whispered, but the sound of my voice was swallowed by the fog, dissipating into nothingness. Panic bubbled up inside me as I realized I was alone, completely, utterly alone. The others were gone, vanished as if they had never existed. I called out their names, my voice growing hoarse with desperation. But there was no answer, only the echo of my own fear bouncing back at me. I began to walk, my footsteps muffled by the damp ground beneath me. The fog seemed to shift around me, closing in, making it impossible to tell which way I was going. It felt like the world was folding in on itself, trapping me in a loop of endless gray. And then I heard it, the whispers. They were faint at first, just a murmur at the edge of my consciousness. But they grew louder with each step, filling my mind with a dissonant chorus of voices. Some were pleading, others were angry, and all of them were in pain. They clawed at my thoughts, their words indistinguishable but their meaning clear. They were trapped here, just like me. I tried to block them out, focusing on finding a way out of this nightmare. But the whispers were relentless, gnawing at my sanity. They spoke of things I didn't want to know, things that sent chills down my spine. They spoke of the forest, of the well, and of the darkness that had taken me. And they spoke of the others, the ones who had come before us, the ones who had never made it out. I quickened my pace, hoping to outrun the voices, but the fog seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, making it harder to breathe. My pulse quickened as the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if they were trying to guide me somewhere. My heart pounded in my chest, and a cold sweat dripped down my back as I realized they weren't just whispers anymore. They were leading me somewhere. I came to a stop when I saw it, looming out of the fog like a twisted specter. The well. It was the same well from the clearing, the same crumbling stones covered in moss and ivy, but now it was different. It was larger, more ominous, the darkness within it seeming to pulse with a life of its own. And there, standing beside the well, was a figure. At first, I thought it was one of my friends, maybe the brave one who had screamed, but as I approached, I realized I was wrong. The figure was tall and thin, its body wrapped in tattered, filthy cloth that hung off it like a shroud. Its face was obscured by the fog, but I could see its eyes. 2 pinpricks of light glowing faintly in the gloom. The figure didn't move as I approached, didn't acknowledge my presence at all, but I could feel its gaze on me, heavy and malevolent. The whispers were louder now, filling my head with a maddening din, and I could feel something pulling me toward the well, an invisible force that I couldn't resist. The figure stepped aside as I reached the well, revealing the dark abyss within. The whispers intensified, rising to a fever pitch, and I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, just like before. I wanted to run, to get away from this place, but my body refused to move. I was rooted to the spot, staring into the darkness, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Then the figure spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its voice a low, guttural rasp that sent shivers down my spine. "None of you should have." I tried to speak, to ask who or what it was, but the words stuck in my throat. The figure moved closer, its eyes boring into mine, and I felt a cold, clammy hand wrap around my wrist, its touch like ice. "There's no escape," the figure continued, its grip tightening. "Not for you. Not for any of you." With a sudden, violent jerk, the figure pulled me toward the well. I stumbled, trying to resist, but it was too strong, dragging me closer to the edge. The darkness within the well seemed to swell, rising up to meet me, and I could feel something moving in the shadows, something that wanted me, needed me. The figure leaned in close, its breath cold against my skin, and whispered in my ear, "You belong to the forest now." And then, it let go. I fell into the well, the darkness swallowing me whole, the whispers screaming in my ears as I plunged deeper and deeper into the abyss. The cold was unbearable, seeping into my bones, and I could feel something reaching for me, something with sharp, bony fingers that tore at my flesh. I tried to scream, but the sound was lost in the void, drowned out by the voices of the damned. The darkness closed in around me, suffocating, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that I would never see the light again. The forest had claimed me. Darkness wrapped around me, suffocating, cold, and absolute. I was falling, but there was no wind, no sensation of movement, just an endless plunge into nothingness. The whispers had become a roar now, a cacophony of voices overlapping in a twisted symphony of despair. They weren't just in my ears. They were inside my head, gnawing at my sanity, shredding my thoughts into pieces. I couldn't tell how long I'd been falling. Time seemed to stretch and warp in this black void. Minutes feeling like hours, or maybe the other way around. My mind was a tangle of fear and confusion, every rational thought drowned out by the whispers, the relentless whispers. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the falling stopped. I hit the ground with a bone-jarring thud, the impact driving the air from my lungs. Pain flared through my body, sharp and electric, but the darkness didn't lift. I was lying on something cold and hard, the surface rough against my skin. I tried to move, to push myself up, but my limbs were heavy, sluggish, as if they were weighted down by invisible chains. For a moment I lay there panting, trying to catch my breath. The whispers had quieted to a low murmur, like the rustle of dead leaves in the wind, but they were still there, still inside my head, a constant, maddening presence. I forced myself to sit up, my body protesting with every movement, and tried to get my bearings. It was still pitch black, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow everything, even the faintest glimmer of light. But as I sat there, I realized I wasn't alone. I could feel them all around me, their presence like a cold weight pressing in on my skin. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a sickly sweet odor that turned my stomach and made my head spin. Then out of the darkness came a voice. Not a whisper this time, but a low, guttural growl that sent ice down my spine. "You're not supposed to be here," it said, the words a rough, scraping sound like nails on a chalkboard. "This place isn't meant for the living." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice was close, too close, as if the speaker was standing right next to me. Though I couldn't see a thing, I could feel the presence of something large and menacing, its breath hot and foul on my face. "I didn't want to be here," I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with fear. "I don't want to be here." The voice let out a low, rumbling laugh, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the darkness, shaking the ground beneath me. "It doesn't matter what you want," the voice snarled. "You're here now, and there's no way out." The words sent a wave of panic through me, and I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain that shot through my body. I had to get out of here, had to find a way back to the light, to the world I knew. But as I turned, trying to find some sense of direction, I felt it. Something cold and wet, brushing against my skin. I recoiled, but it was too late. The thing, whatever it was all around me now, slithering over my skin like a mass of slimy, writhing tendrils. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat as the tendrils tightened, wrapping around my arms, my legs, pulling me down into the darkness. "No!" I cried, struggling against the thing that had me in its grasp. "Let me go!" But the more I fought, the tighter the tendrils became, constricting around me like a python squeezing the life out of its prey. I could feel them moving, twisting as if they had a life of their own, slithering up my neck, across my face, over my eyes. They were everywhere, inside me, outside me, filling my mouth, my lungs, choking me with their foul, rotten stench. The darkness was absolute now, not just around me, but inside me, seeping into my very soul. I could feel it. A cold, gnawing presence, devouring everything that made me who I was, replacing it with something else. Something old and hungry and full of malice. The whispers had returned, louder than ever, a chorus of voices screaming in agony, and I knew, deep down, that I was becoming one of them. The darkness was taking me, turning me into one of the lost souls that wandered this forsaken place, trapped forever in a prison of their own making. Then, just as I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, the tendrils released me. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. The darkness still pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. But there was a faint light now, a dim, flickering glow that seemed to come from somewhere far away. I forced myself to look up, to follow the light, and that's when I saw them. They were all around me, the lost souls, their bodies twisted and broken, their faces contorted in eternal agony. They moved slowly, shambling through the darkness, their eyes hollow and empty, their mouths hanging open in silent screams. They were barely human anymore, more like shadows of what they once were, their flesh rotting away, their bones protruding through their decaying skin. And then I realized, with a cold, sinking dread, that I recognized them. They were the others, the ones who had come with me into the forest. Their faces, though twisted and decayed, were familiar, their voices, now part of the whispers, hauntingly recognizable. They had been taken by the darkness, consumed by it, and now they were lost, just like the others before them, just like I was about to be. The light flickered again, closer now, and I knew I had to follow it. It was my only chance, my only hope of escaping this nightmare. But as I took a step toward it, something cold and sharp wrapped around my ankle, yanking me back into the darkness. I looked down and saw it, a skeletal hand, bony fingers digging into my flesh, pulling me back toward the well, back toward the abyss. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, the voices screaming at me, telling me to give in, to let go, to become one of them. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. With a surge of strength, I kicked out, breaking free of the hand's grip, and stumbled forward, toward the light. The lost souls reached for me, their hands grasping at me, their hollow eyes pleading. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The light was just ahead, brighter now, piercing through the darkness, a beacon of hope in this hellish nightmare. I reached out for it, my fingers brushing against the light, and then the ground beneath me gave way. I fell again, but this time there was no end, no ground to stop my descent. I was falling, endlessly falling, the light fading, the darkness closing in, and the whispers. Oh, the whispers. They were laughing now, a cruel, mocking laughter that echoed in my mind, tearing at my sanity. I was falling into the abyss, into the very heart of the darkness, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that I would never escape. The forest had claimed me, and there was no way out, and as the last of the light disappeared, I heard it. A voice, different from the others, colder, more sinister. It was the same voice that had spoken to me earlier, the voice of the figure by the well. "Welcome to the forest," it said, its words dripping with malice. "You'll never leave." And then the darkness swallowed me whole. The darkness wrapped around me, suffocating, an all-consuming void. The whispers had become a chaotic storm, swirling in my mind, threatening to tear apart the last shreds of my sanity. I was falling deeper into the abyss, the weight of despair crushing my spirit, and I knew, with a sinking dread, that there was no escape. The forest had claimed me, and soon I would be one of them, just another lost soul trapped in this nightmarish place. But then, amidst the chaos, something changed. A faint warmth began to spread through the darkness, a soft, golden glow that grew stronger with each passing second. It was small at first, like a single candle in a vast, empty night, but it burned with an intensity that pushed back the shadows, driving them away. The whispers faltered, the storm of voices weakening as the light grew brighter, stronger, until it was all around me, wrapping me in its warmth. I wasn't falling anymore. I was standing, the ground solid beneath my feet, and the suffocating darkness was gone, replaced by a beautiful golden light that filled the air with a sense of peace and tranquility. The voices that had tormented me were silent now, and the oppressive weight of despair had lifted, replaced by a feeling of hope, fragile but real. I looked around, trying to understand what had happened, and that's when I saw her. She stood at the edge of the light, just beyond its warm embrace, a figure bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with long flowing hair that shimmered like spun gold, and eyes that sparkled with a kindness that seemed out of place in this dark, twisted world. She wore a simple white dress that fluttered gently in the breeze, and as she stepped forward, the light seemed to follow her, growing brighter with every step. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice gentle, soothing, like a cool breeze on a hot summer day. "This is not your fate." I opened my mouth to speak, to ask who she was, how she could be here in this place of despair, but the words caught in my throat. It was as if she already knew my questions, as if she could read the confusion and fear that still lingered in my heart. "You've been trapped in the forest's darkness," she continued, her voice calm and reassuring. "But that darkness is not as powerful as it seems. There is light, even in the darkest of places, and that light can guide you out, if you let it." I took a hesitant step forward, reaching out for her, and the warmth of the light grew stronger, filling me with a sense of calm I hadn't felt since entering the forest. It was as if all the fear, all the despair that had gripped me, was being washed away, replaced by a sense of clarity, of purpose. "Who are you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice trembling, but not with fear, with hope. She smiled, a soft, gentle smile that filled me with an overwhelming sense of peace. "I am a guardian of this forest," she said, her eyes filled with compassion. "Long ago, I too was lost here, but I found the light, and now I help others find their way out." "But the others," I said, the memories of my friends flooding back. "They're still out there, lost in the darkness. How can I save them?" Her smile faltered, just for a moment, and a flicker of sadness passed through her eyes. "The darkness has claimed many souls," she said softly, "but it's never too late to try. If you hold on to the light, if you let it guide you, you can find them and bring them back." A surge of determination welled up inside me, stronger than the fear, stronger than the despair. I wasn't going to leave my friends behind. Not now, not after everything we had been through. I would find them, and I would bring them back into the light. "Show me how," I said, my voice firm, resolute. She nodded, her smile returning, brighter than before. "Hold on to the light," she said, extending her hand toward me. "Let it guide you, and trust in its power. It will lead you to them." I reached out, and the moment our hands touched, the light exploded into brilliance, blindingly bright but not painful. It enveloped me completely, filling me with warmth, with hope, and I felt a connection, a bond with the light, with the guardian, with something greater than myself. When the light dimmed, I found myself back in the forest, but it was different now. The darkness still lingered in the distance, but it was no longer overwhelming. The trees were illuminated by the golden glow that surrounded me, and the whispers had been replaced by a gentle hum, like the sound of a distant river. I knew what I had to do. I walked through the forest, the light guiding my steps, pushing back the darkness with every movement. The trees, once menacing and twisted, now seemed to part before me, as if they too were touched by the light. I could feel the presence of my friends, faint but growing stronger, and I followed that feeling, letting it pull me toward them. It wasn't long before I found the first of them. He was huddled at the base of a tree, his face pale and drawn, eyes wide with fear. The darkness had taken hold of him, wrapping him in its cold embrace, but the moment the light touched him, he gasped, his eyes clearing, the fear melting away. "The light," I said, holding out my hand. "Hold on to it. It will guide you." He hesitated for a moment, his eyes filled with uncertainty. But then he took my hand, and the light spread to him, pushing away the last remnants of darkness. His face relaxed, the fear replaced by a look of relief, of hope, and together we continued through the forest. One by one we found the others, each lost in their own pocket of darkness, each saved by the light. And with every soul we rescued, the forest seemed to grow brighter, the shadows retreating, the whispers fading into nothingness. Finally, we reached the clearing where the old well stood, now just a harmless ruin bathed in the soft glow of the light. The darkness that had once surrounded it was gone, replaced by a peaceful, serene silence. The guardian appeared beside the well, her form shimmering in the golden light. "You've done well," she said, her voice filled with pride. "The forest has been cleansed, the darkness driven away. You're free to leave." I turned to my friends, their faces now full of life, of hope, and I knew that we had made it. We had escaped the darkness. But before we left, I had one last question. "What about you?" I asked, turning back to the guardian. "Will you be all right?" She smiled, a bright, radiant smile. "My work here is done," she said. "The forest no longer needs me. It's time for me to move on." And with that, she began to fade, her form dissolving into the light, becoming one with the golden glow that surrounded us. "Thank you," I whispered. And as the last of her light faded, I felt a deep sense of peace, of closure. The forest was no longer a place of fear and despair. It was a place of light, of hope, and we had been part of that change. We made our way out of the forest, the light guiding us until we emerged into the cool night air, the town of Ashford visible in the distance. We were tired, our bodies and minds exhausted, but we were free. We had survived the forest of whispers, and we had brought the light back with us. As we walked back to town, I looked up at the stars, twinkling brightly in the clear night sky, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. We were alive, we were together, and the darkness was behind us. We had faced the terror of the forest, and we had won. And from that night on, the legend of the Forest of Whispers was no longer one of fear, but of hope, of the light that could drive away even the deepest darkness.